People always ask how I balance my family life with 400 shows a year. I'm just doing what I love with the people I love. It's my magic life.
I like Wes Iseli. I like everything about him.
All right, today's podcast, we have a man that's pretty much done it all. He's a magician, a stand-up comedian, professional blackjack player, an actor, a songwriter, a Houdini authority, and much, much more. We have a lot to get into and only an hour to do it. So everybody, let's give a big hand for Dick Brookz. Woo!
Hey!
How was that? Was that good?
That was good. That was great.
All right. Hey, before we go too far, we do have his business partner on the line, magician Dorothy Dietrich, and she'll be on my podcast in a couple weeks. But Dorothy, how are you, girl?
I'm swell.
Swell.
Everything is beautiful. Life's a peach.
Awesome. Well, Dick, today's episode's all about you, man. How did you get started in magic?
Well, when I was a kid, I came from New York City, and in the upper part of the Bronx, it was the ghetto at the time, pretty much a very poor Italian and Irish, etc., and black and Spanish in the neighborhood I was in. And there was a guy by the name of Abe Horowitz, who was the official magician, believe it or not, of the city of New York. And got that. He was also an educator, a college grad, etc., and a teacher. And he was, however, a magician and a very fine one. And Mayor LaGuardia, who was the mayor at the time, made him New York's official magician. I don't know if there's ever been one since. That's
pretty awesome. That's a cool title to get.
Yeah.
Yep. And what function was with the city was that he would go around to community centers all over the city, the 5 boroughs, probably emphasizing the least rich cities, the more poverty parts of the city. And in community centers, he would do a magic show. And that was the first time I ever saw a live magician perform. I was probably, 12 or 13. And he mentioned in the show that there was a club that was he was called Peter Pan the Magic Man. That was his nickname. And he said there was a Peter Pan Magic Club that met every Saturday in downtown New York City around, I guess, the 20s or so. I'm not sure. I don't remember real clearly. And so that's how I got started in magic. I went down there, and there were several other people that we're still in touch with, as a matter of fact. One is Al Callis, who is still with us, and the other one is Kenneth Silverman, who passed away sadly a little while back. And he wrote the greatest book ever written on Houdini, because he was a great biographer. So everybody that you ever ask now, what's the best biography of Houdini, they'll always say it was the most accurate one without fallacies and a lot of rumors and, so-called facts, was Ken Silverman. So it's just called Houdini is the name of it.
I have it in my collection. It's a must-have.
Okay. Yeah, it's got a subtitle, but
It was actually Houdini, exclamation.
yeah. And so that's how I started out in magic. And when I got a bit older, I was already doing shows in different places, parties and stuff. And I went to Clark Junior High School in New York City, in the Bronx, and one of my people that was in the same classes as me was a fellow by the name of Walden Casado. He was from around 139th Street in that section. I was from around 155th Street, but the junior high school kind of was in between those two areas. And his name was Walden Casado, who later would become Bobby Darin, Mac the Knife, and the well-known pop singer.
Wow.
And we were buddies, and we both had a very high IQ. And so when it came time for the counselors to tell us what to do, they suggested that we go to the Bronx Science High School, Bronx Science of New York, which was a very elite school. You had to pass tests, special tests. They don't even allow it anymore to test kids to go to school because they don't want anybody to be treated special. So in a way it's stupid, in a way it's smart. I can't really tell you the politics about it. But anyway, they suggested we either go there or to the other one, which was Stuyvesant High School, which was in downtown New York. Bronx High School was up closer to where we live, and they suggested that we go there. In retrospect, we should have really both gone to the High School of Performing Arts because that was what we really had aptitude for and was interested in at that time. We kind of, at a very early age, both knew that some form of show business or the entertainment business would be the direction that we would choose to pursue. So we both went to Bronx Science and graduated, and then after we graduated, again following that same path, being told by counselors, high school counselors, they say those that can't do teach, so they were teaching. They couldn't do anything, I guess. And they both again suggested that we go for engineering and go to City College. And at that time, I don't know now anymore, but that time you could go to college for free. I think things have changed now.
It's a little bit more expensive than that.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's become a racket, actually, education. But in those days, if you had the marks, I think you had to have a B plus or higher average to get in because it was, a sliding scale. So nobody below a B plus. You had to have an A or a B plus. That's how they gauge people. I don't think they do that even anymore, in order to get into City College. And so we both went to City College, and because it wasn't really what we wanted to do, about a year or two in, we both dropped out and went into the entertainment business. So, and then I realized very young in that time that typically, and I don't mean to insult anybody, but there's not a real great path to very rich and successful in the entertainment business in magic. You generally don't become a top headliner. So very early on in that period, I switched over to comedy magic, and then from there to just plain stand-up comedy. Because the toughest thing to do in the world, and is why people get paid for it, is to walk out to the microphone with nothing in your hand, no instrument, no magic tricks, no props, and just walk up to the microphone and talk and be funny. So I guess Bob Hope was one of the early ones to do that kind of a thing, and that's where the real money wasn't even as, I guess, today in show business, except now, and of course, in the record industry as well.
Yeah, but when you dropped out of college, though, you got drafted.
Yeah, I did. I did.
You skipped that part.
Yeah, because when I dropped out of, because the Korean War was on at the time, and I was exempt from being drafted which they were taking all young physical men in good shape. Bobby Darin was not in good shape. He had rheumatic fever, so he wouldn't be subject to that whether he's in or out. But since I supposedly was in good health, it made me eligible to be drafted. So I went into the Army, and while I was in the Army, I got picked up from civil service, special services. I went to Fort Dix, and they were going to put me into special services there in New Jersey because I was entertaining the officers' clubs and the non-commissioned officers' clubs, and they would even farm me out to different Army bases around the East Coast to entertain. And then there was some kind of a scandal, so they all said that they couldn't keep me there at Fort Dix, so it ended up because of high grades. It's a long story, but I ended up in New Rochelle, which is just north of New York City, again in special services. And because I was in special services, I had special privileges because you couldn't keep normal hours like 9 to 5, so I didn't have to have reveille, what they call reveille in the morning, where you have to get up and line up and start your day, and you have to, you have to have, they assign the schedules. I was able to make up my own schedule, and how I set it up was that I was able on weekends, by juggling around with some of the other guys in special services and giving them some of my privileges, they would give me some of their privileges. I ended up having an apartment in the Bronx, and I ended up still being able to work some no local clubs in and around New York City while I was in the military.
That's awesome. God bless you. You had a skill. You didn't have to get up for reveille and do all that stuff, man. Getting up early is awful, especially if somebody's blowing a horn in your face.
Yeah. So I've been always seemed to have an ability to move in and out of things like that. And when I came out of the military, of course, I went right back into show business and worked up and down the East Coast basically as a stand-up comic. I played a little guitar at the time, not very much, but I could, and because sometimes it makes it easy to end the show with some kind of a little ditty or song. So I might throw that in at times. I also played harmonica as a kid, not real well, but sometimes I would use that as well. And little by little, I started to move along. And to make a long story short, eventually I would be picked up by an agent that was one of the biggest and most important agents for comedians at the time, and that was a guy by the name of Willie Weber. And he booked and handled such comedians, like Jackie Gleason. I don't know if you heard of him.
Oh,
Jackie
sure.
Gleason, just kidding. Jackie Gleason, Pat Cooper, another guy you might not know, Don Rickles.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be in that kind of company was very, very, very good. And I actually first hooked up with him just before I went in the Army and started to work some real fine supper clubs. They had in those days what they call supper clubs, which was a nightclub that you went to dinner. It was a theater kind of setup, and you went to dinner, and on stage, then they would have a stage show, and usually it would be anywhere from 3 acts to an entire review. And if it was 3 acts, it would be a dancer or a dance team, a singer, and a comedian. And otherwise, sometimes it would be, instead of a singer and a comedian, if the singer was a headliner, then it would be the comedian in the middle and the singer at the end. And so that was a pretty good lifestyle doing that. And but what had happened is over time, that part of show business kind of just dwindled down into oblivion. So that gives you a brief outline of how I got not all the way to here where I am now, but it gives you a background of how I started.
No, that was a million miles a minute, wrapping up a whole bunch of stuff. So as far as the songwriting, is that what you were doing? You were closing your acts with songwriting, or did you write songs that you sold to other people?
When in that period, there was all of the acts would get together. How it was set up in show business, most of the theatrical agents were all in the Broadway Times Square area. All the agents would be like upstairs in the Palace building, upstairs in the Brill building, upstairs at 1650 Broadway, which was about 58th Street. The Brill building was about 51st Street. Palace building was about 46th Street. So you do what they call making the rounds. You would go from one agent to another on Monday if you wanted to steady New York acts, and you would go from one agent to another. It was called doing the go-sees, and you would just drop in and remind them that you weren't on the road that week and you were looking for a job, and maybe even put you into weekends. Most of the jobs then would be weekends, and sometimes you'd work the middle of the week, and you'd go Typically, you'd start at the Palace Building, walk up to the Brill Building on 51st Street, and then to the 1650 Broadway, like I said, which was around 58th Street. And then there was a place there called Hanson's Drugstore, which would be a hangout for all the acts as they're going from place to place. And we all knew each other. Bobby Darin and others would meet there, Pat Cooper, etc. And we all would all meet either at Hanson's Drugstore or the B&G Restaurant coffee shop, which was right next door. So,
Man, that is so awesome. To be a fly on that wall. Wow.
It was really a cool period of time. And so we'd all meet there, and we'd trade ideas and sometimes routines. And so that's kind of how that all developed in that area. I don't know what got me into that, but that's how we used to find work in show business. And then that all kind of, little by little, that all went away.
Well, I was telling you during the pre-interview that, I read about the supper clubs, and I've heard about the supper clubs in the old Magic magazines and everything, but I've never experienced that. So Dorothy was saying that was a pretty cool thing. It was just...
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
People would dress up, go for dinner, and be entertained, and it was just... I couldn't imagine it ever not happening.
And some of the supper clubs would be 6 nights a week, because one night was always dark. But sometimes it would be 6 nights a week, and then as it thinned down, it would become Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then Friday, Saturday, and then toward the end it was just Saturday nights. And then I went from there. As I said, I was working for Willie Weber, and I went to work the Caribbean. I went to the Americana Hotel for a week to entertain there, and I ended up being held over for 10 weeks at the Americana Hotel in Puerto Rico. I don't know what it's now. The building's probably still there and much fancier, but at that time it was called the Americana Hotel, and they also had a casino. Most of the casinos in Puerto Rico are in San Juan, because that's the biggest city there. There might be a casino in Mayagüez and a couple other towns in Puerto Rico, but there's a host at the time, and even today, there's a whole slew of casinos in San Juan. And that's where I got introduced to gambling. And it turns out that because of my background in magic and in card tricks, and to do card tricks, you have to understand how a deck of cards work. You have to know you have to be able to memorize sometimes different card tricks or different sequences. And you also realize, Dorothy doesn't like me saying that, but a deck of cards has a memory. So, and what I mean by that, if you take a pair of dice and you roll it down the table, that pair of dice does not remember what it did the last roll. Although some people believe in winning streaks and all of that, but that's just superstition. So it's an independent roll. So each time you roll the dice, it doesn't know where it rolls next time. So the same number could come up several times in a row. A different number could come up, and just because one number comes up 10 times doesn't mean the next time it couldn't come up the 11th time, or vice versa. But cards are different. If you have 52 cards in the deck and all of the aces are gone, you can't have a blackjack. It's impossible. And a blackjack is the best hand a player can get, because it pays 3 for 2. No other card combination plays 3 for 2. Everything else plays equal money, and you either beat the dealer or you lose to the dealer. So, but the advantage of the blackjack is if you get a blackjack, you get paid 50% more. If the dealer wins a blackjack, he only gets your money. So
Right.
If you could do that all day, if he could win one and you could win one all day long and do nothing else, by the end of the day, the player would have a fortune of money. So that's what it means when you say that the deck of cards has a memory. And if there's a lot of 10s in a deck, which includes 10, Jack, Queen, King, because in blackjack they're all worth 10. If there's a lot of 10s in the deck, if you have a bad hand, like a 10 and a 6 or a 10 and a 5, you don't have to hit the deck. But if, hit the hand. But if the dealer has a 10 and a 5, by the rules of the game, he has to hit. So since he's forced to do that, if there's a lot of 10s in the deck, it favors the player. By the opposite token, if there's a lot of small cards in the deck, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6, the 5 being the most valuable, I'll tell you why in a minute. But if there's a lot of small cards and the dealer has to hit from 12 to 16, he's less likely to break. So that's when the odds of the game shifts to the dealer. And the reason the 5 is the most valuable is because the dealer has to hit between 12 and 16. And the 5 is the only card that will make, with one card, a 12, it'll make it a 17, so he won't bust. And if he has a 16, it'll make it a 21. So that's the most valuable card to the dealer. If there's a lot of 2s in the deck, it's not as valuable, because if he has 12, it'll only give him 14, and he has to hit again. But of course, if he has 16 and he gets a 2, he has an 18. So that gives you a brief rundown in how blackjack, how the odds shift as the game is playing from hand to hand.
I'm going to have to rewind this and write stuff down, man. That was a serious lesson. What about the 5-card draw? Does that beat? That doesn't beat a blackjack if you draw 5?
I didn't hear what you said.
If you get 5 cards and you don't hit blackjack.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what's called, it's kind of a side bet. It's not a side bet, but all casinos don't have that.
Oh, okay.
Different casinos have different rules like that and different side bets. The only side bet, though, that is valuable to someone that knows the composition of the deck is what they call insurance. And what insurance means is if the dealer has an ace up, you can bet half your money, and if he has an ace up, it's called insurance, so that you insure your bet not to lose. And if he has a blackjack, he wins your money, but then he pays you the insurance money, which means it's a standoff. You don't lose or make any money. And that's another one where someone that's paying attention to the cards, if more than half the cards in the deck, I think about, I don't know the number, I'm going to guess about a third of the cards are 10s. So taking insurance is a sucker bet because it's only pays 50% more. But if there's more than half the deck has 10s in it, and you know that as a card counter, then it does pay to take insurance. And usually when you're putting up your big money as a card player, by counting the deck, when you're putting up your big money is when there are a lot of 10s in the deck, because it favors you because you can bust out. So that's a great advantage for you to be able to take insurance at that time.
See, I've never done insurance because I never understood it. So
Yeah, well,
with you being so good and becoming a pro blackjack player, what rules did they change over time because of you?
yeah, well, what happened is there was a guy that wrote I was playing blackjack in the 60s, and then I had a system of my own, which I devised on my own because of, like I told you, some of the details. But a guy by the name of Ed Thorpe in the late 60s came out with a book called Beat the Dealer. And in that, he figured out through computers this information about how the deck shifts, and he wrote a book that eventually became a multi-million seller called Beat the Dealer. And in the first edition, he explained this mostly building around the 10s, counting the 10s as against the other cards. And Henry Morgan was a big comedian at the time, and when he wrote the book, Henry Morgan became interested in this, and they both came down to Puerto Rico to play. And he was consistently losing money. And so the pit boss told him, one of the pit bosses, one of the casinos, jokingly said to him, if you want to know how to play blackjack, go see that guy over there. And they sent him over to where I was playing. And when I was playing blackjack in Puerto Rico, if you're a big First of all, the great thing about Puerto Rico, not like other places, is in Puerto Rico, the government, it's a subsidiary of the United States, but it's independent of the United States. And in Puerto Rico, the government itself sets the rules and the conditions for gambling. So it's not like Vegas where it can shift from time to time according to what the Vegas Gambling Commission wants, because they only protect the house. In Puerto Rico, it was set up so it didn't protect the house or the gambler, but they didn't want anybody to take unfair advantage. So you couldn't change the rules in Puerto Rico. However, it's good if you're doing well as a gambler, is not to be able to perceive to be an advantage player. Otherwise, in any game, you're going to be, at least in the United States, you're going to be thrown out. But even so, it pays not to be recognized. So what I would do is I would get up they only had gambling in the dark and after the day, not in the beginning of the day. Now it might be all day long, I don't know. And the reason for that is, again, the government wanted to protect the people, so they didn't want the gambling casinos open until after 5 o'clock, because most people worked 9 to 5. So the casinos were only open in the evening in that period. And I think they were closed one day a week, maybe Sunday, because, again, it's a very religious community, and they abide by their own rules. So at any rate, I would also, however, disguise what I was doing. I never let anybody know how much I was winning. I would secret, because I was a magician. I knew how to palm chicks, so I would palm them off and I would hide them in my pocket so they didn't realize how much I was winning. I would dress very shabbily, not in a distasteful way, because you didn't want people to move, be repulsed by you. And I drove around in a motor scooter. You can do that in Puerto Rico because you have one shower a day, 3 in the afternoon. It lasts for 10 minutes. Most of the rest of the time, it's beautiful and sunny. So I told people I couldn't even afford a car. I actually had 2 cars, but I said I couldn't afford a car. And you don't want people to know how much money you're making. So even when Ed Thorpe came down to play, they didn't even make as expenses. The guy that wrote the book, the guy that I told you that they said to go watch me, when he came out with the second edition of his book after seeing me play, if you buy Beat the Dealer since then, he's got about 10 or 20 pages devoted to me in the book. And he calls it, the section, he calls it Enter the Salmon. That's what they call me, the Salmon. Now, why they call me the Salmon is because a salmon, S-A-L-M-O-N, a salmon fish swims upstream against the current. So they call me Salmon because they figured I was trying to beat the system, and they figured it was not possible to beat the system. And also, unknown to a lot of people, unless you're a local Puerto Rican, Salmon also means, in Puerto Rican slang, what do you call it? Huh? In Puerto Rican slang, Salmon means a jerk. So they all,
wow, that's
so they
funny.
all considered me a jerk, and they called it a la larga in slang. What a la larga means, in the long run, I would lose the money back. So in order to not lose all my money back, what I did was the first $50,000 I made. By the way, that's all that Thorpe knew I made. He thought, because you minimize your winnings. The first $50,000, I bought a house for my mom and dad in Pennsylvania. With the idea that in case this is some wild and crazy fluke or something changes, I'm never going to give that money back. So I bought a house for my mom and dad in New York City, in New Jersey, and then I continued to build up my bankroll. And as I built up my bankroll, I got involved in other things. I ended up buying a Casa de Empeño, which is called a pawn shop. I became an owner in a pawn shop. I ended up opening up an art gallery in the most prime center of town in El San Juan, overlooking the bay, and people would come to the bay and look how beautiful it was. And right on that corner, I had an art gallery. So what I did
And they thought you were the jerk. They thought you were losing all your stuff.
Well, yeah. So that's what. I kept all of this kind of on the QT, but ultimately, as you alluded to, they would change the rules after I won what I would say would have been about $250,000. So they decided to change the rules in blackjack, and that did happen around the country as well, in Las Vegas and other places. And they also went from, when I was playing blackjack, they dealt two decks of cards in a shoe. They had a shoe because they knew that you could cheat by, if you held a deck in your hand, you could do what they call second dealing, and you could do peeking at the top card to know what's coming up. By the dealer could do that, and then if this was a card that would bust you, he would give it to you. If it was a 5 and he didn't want to give it to you, he would deal a second card, and that whatever it was less likely to help you. Or if he knew it was a 10 coming up next, and you had a 15, he would deal it to you and bust you. So that's the reason they use the shoe, although they have manufactured shoes that can cheat too, but generally not. But generally not. And
right.
The thing is, the reason that is not preferred by professional cheats is the shoe you can get caught with. But if you're doing it in your hands, they can't catch you. I mean, they can't exactly prove it. But if they grab the shoe and take it to the district attorney, they can prove that you're cheating. So that gives you a little background on that.
Wow. We went down a whole rabbit hole in the passion that you had for playing cards and talking about that, man. That's amazing. That is amazing, Dick.
Yeah, so anyway, I was in Puerto Rico for quite a while, and I just got bored with it over time. And I did move my mom and dad down to Puerto Rico. With some of the money that I earned, I bought 2 taxi cabs and 2 medallions. You know what a medallion is on a taxi?
No, that's a license, isn't it?
Yeah, like in New York, they probably sell for about $200,000. I'm guessing. I don't know. Maybe more. It could be $1 million, or it could be 100,000. But what a medallion is, that it's the right to own a taxi cab, and in different communities like New York or Paris or different places, a medallion would be worth more than, say, in a town like Scranton, or, it depends on the value of it. And so I bought 2 of those, plus the vehicles themselves you have to buy. And I bought 2 of those, and I also gave them to my parents, because then my father could rent it out and be guaranteed to earn a living, instead of having to work in a factory as a day laborer, which is what he did in New Jersey all of his life until this period. And so we all ended up in Puerto Rico. I bought them a condominium also, because I lived in the condominium, but I ended up buying a house in Puerto Rico, so I gave them the condominium. So I had all this going in Puerto Rico, but frankly I got bored of it after a while, and ended up deciding to come back into the city, and went back into show business on some level. And my parents didn't want to be stranded. They felt they were being stranded. I tried to teach my father blackjack as well, but unfortunately my father was very suspicious kind of person, and superstitious. So he believed in things like running streaks, and bad cards follow good cards. And,
that's not going to work.
And he wasn't disciplined. So, and in order to play a good game of blackjack, it's all about math, and it's all about discipline. You have to be extremely disciplined, and when you do have losing and winning streaks, you don't win all the time, and you have to just believe in the math. And my father didn't have the personality for that, so I tried, but it didn't work. And after doing all of this for them, they moved back to New Jersey. And did they appreciate it all? Frankly, no.
Aw.
I think it was too much of a roller coaster life for them to understand and to be able to function in.
Yeah.
Well, daggone, you can't say you didn't try. That is
Yeah.
amazing. So I'm just trying to get the timeline together. So you were doing magic shows. You did great in school. You went to college. You dropped out of college. Got into the Army. At what point were you doing the Tootsie Roll commercials?
That was very, very early on. That was when I was in my teens. But there was a guy by the name of Skipper Dawes who was a very important, what we would call now, I guess, a talent agent. And Skipper Dawes would line up different shows. And there was a show, I don't know if you ever heard of Paul Whiteman.
No.
Paul Whiteman was at one period called the King of Jazz. And he wasn't actually a jazz musician as we think of it now, but he was in the transition period, I guess in the 20s and so, when they tried to make jazz, take it away from the black people who pretty much developed it, or it came from their roots, from and he quote unquote legitimized it in the 20s and 30s, and had a concert audience that played jazz. And you might not think much of that, but there was a young songwriter that he convinced that was not well known at the time, by the name of George Gershwin, and he convinced him to write a rhapsody for him called Rhapsody in Blue. And his claim to fame, the band leader, was that he introduced Rhapsody in Blue to the world, and of course made George Gershwin a major composer.
See, my introduction to Gershwin was Copperfield. Copperfield used a lot of his stuff.
Yeah, and so at any rate, Skipper Dawes came to New York looking for people to do Tootsie Roll commercials for the Paul Whiteman show. Whiteman had a show that was kind of like a talent show, and I auditioned for the talent show, didn't get it at that point, but on the spot he hired me. He wasn't looking for this, but on the spot he hired me to do the Tootsie Roll commercials for the Paul Whiteman show in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. So what they would do is they would mail me the script. I was a teenage kid. They would mail me the script. I would memorize it. My father wasn't interested in helping me out, so I would have to go down to Penn Station, get on the train, go out to the Philly. Then they had the elevated train in Philly at the time, and that was like their version of the subway. It went into the ground and out, which it also did in New York. It would go into the ground as well when it got into Manhattan. In the Bronx and stuff, it was an elevated train. And I would take that to this gymnasium that they turned into a studio, and I would do that every single week. And I was making like about $200 a week doing that as a kid, and that was more than my father was working in a factory 40 hours a week. So at any rate, they would drive. I would have to go out there, and then I guess they realized at some time that why pay me all of this money? I'm a minor. They could get in trouble, because they had minor laws in those days. They still do, I guess. So what they ended up doing is they decided to hire an adult to take my place, because they figured for the same $200, they could get him for an entire week, or maybe add 100 to it, or whatever, and they wouldn't be in this kind of jackpot, taking this minor back and forth from New York, and something could always happen to me on the way, and I could miss the show, because in those days the shows were live. They weren't recorded, they were live. And so who did they hire? Dick Clark to take my place.
Wow.
And Dick Clark did some of those commercials for the Paul Whiteman show, and then of course eventually moved on, and that show, the Paul Whiteman show, because it had a lot of youngsters, as I said, that ended up being the theme for the early Dick Clark shows. I forget what they were called.
That's not American Bandstand, though.
Yeah, American Bandstand.
Okay.
And that stuff, yeah. So that was that Dick Clark coming out of that.
Wow. So when did the townhouse come into play?
Well, yeah. The problem with blackjack, if you want to be a professional player with blackjack, you have to go from town to town looking for opportunities. You have to jump in the car. Even today, I don't even know if it's very well beatable now because of the rule changes. But in the prime of the blackjack days, you had to get in your car. You'd go to Puerto Rico. You'd go to the Dominican Republic. You'd go to Las Vegas. You'd have to bounce around. You couldn't stay in any one place at any length of time because you'd be spotted as a professional. So you do a hit and run kind of thing. And my personal lifestyle, my whole life, and even now, and even when I was in Puerto Rico gambling, was to set up a route somewhere, stay in one place. I like sleeping in the same bed every night, that kind of thing. So we were in New York City. I had a place in the Village. It was a converted storefront on, I guess, what was it, on East 9th Street, East 6th Street, and it was perfect because I used to go doing my different club dates, and I had a car. You could park the car downtown in those days if you owned a car, and I rented a storefront that before it was a storefront, it was a jewelry store. So it had an alarm system. It had bars in the back window, bars in the front window. You didn't have to climb up and down the stairs with your props or your musical instrument, or your sound system or anything like that, because you had you are on the ground floor. You just come right out and you would load up your car and do your shows. But we were looking at the time for a place to settle down in besides doing that, because again, I like being in one place. So we discovered this building on the Upper East Side on 61st and 3rd Avenue, which was the prime section of Upper New York, and it was called the Upper East Side. And we had a 4-story building that we rented. Actually, we didn't originally start it. A guy that we knew by the name of Eddie Davis was a chemical engineer, and he was very brilliant. And Eddie Davis even devised some kind of a new paint system that some well-known artist of the day made his name by being able to use these paints that no one had ever seen before. I don't know what he mixed in with the paints, Eddie Davis, but this artist became quite famous. And of course, Eddie Davis was extremely talented. And so Eddie Davis decided he didn't want to work that kind of work. And so he opened up this place, mostly convinced by, he was an amateur magician, and 3 amateur magicians tried to convince him, or did convince him, with all of his money, because they were broke. A lot of magicians are broke. They were broke and down and out. So they convinced him that if he opened up this place, they would entertain there. So he leased this place on 61st and 3rd Avenue, and like I said, it had several levels. And then as soon as he got committed and had this big contract and everything, then they held him up for a lot of money. Not very nice.
Wow.
So they held him up for a lot of money.
He had no customers. So what?
And he had no customers.
Yeah.
So he naturally, he had to gravitate away from them. So he started to try to find different performers to perform and make it kind of like, what do you call those clubs where people break in? They had a lot of them in those times. Catch a Rising Star and that kind of stuff. The Improv.
Right.
And so he would have different performers perform there. But he never did real well. He wouldn't make a lot of money. And then one summer, because we knew he was in this jackpot, one summer because our big season was not the summertime. Our big season was, in fact, the summertime was our slow season. We might do camps and stuff like that, but we were mostly open on the off on the weekends. So when we were off, what we told Eddie Davis was that can you still hear me?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Yeah, my phone just lit up. What we told Eddie Davis was we would work there for free. We wouldn't even take the little, he used to pay a few dollars, $10, $20 each person. We would work it for free to try to build up his business and help him out with publicity, because we were very good and always have been good with publicity. So we ended up, now the New York Times is the most important newspaper in the world at the time, especially in New York. And in order for the New York Times to review you, they had a rule. And the rule was they had to come to your nightclub or your place or your cabaret or your theater event if it was ongoing. Not a Broadway show, but, going out stuff. They would have to come in secret so that you didn't know they were there, so that they couldn't try to bribe you or try to do something special. Right. And they'd have to come 3 times, not just once. They'd have to come 3 times unannounced.
That's a cool rule, though. That's good.
Yeah. And after they came 3, in case the second time was a fluke.
Right.
Because the Times did not want to have bad reviews that people then turn around and complain. So after 3 times, they came. And they wrote a fantastic write-up. They called me Cheery-Eyed something or other, and gave a real rave review to the shows we were doing at the Magic Townhouse. And believe it or not, that one good review in the New York Times turned around the entire business of that place. It was sold out every single weekend after that one simple good write-up in the New York Times.
Now, was that when you guys were working it, or when you guys owned it?
Well, we were the act, so.
We were the
Oh,
actors
you were
at
it.
the time.
Okay.
But then, of course, we moved away after a little while. But at any rate, we turned the business completely around, and people would come back to the place 3 years later with that same write-up. And we told Eddie Davis that we would buy him out of the contract if he wanted. He wanted again to move on. Him and his wife were very wealthy. She was a Wall Street banker. She got what they called the golden parachute, and then they ended up buying a yacht. And they literally, to this day, if they're still alive, they would travel the world on a yacht, including going across the Atlantic Ocean once they were nearly hijacked. Going across the ocean, but they would go to the Seine, to England and Paris and all over the world, and even the Orient on this yacht that they bought. They'd have a crew of people, etc.
Well,
So we ended up. He gave us a great deal for the first
The whole year, he said no.
Yeah, the whole year. We wouldn't have to pay any of the money to buy the business. He had, I don't know, about $20,000 invested. And then after the first year, then we would pay it off in payments for 7 years. And we eventually paid it off. And that's how we ended up at the Magic Townhouse. And we stayed there for, about 15 years?
15 years, yeah.
Yeah, we stayed there for about 15 years until the rents started to skyrocket. And we could no longer afford it. It ended up the rent would take more money than you could possibly make in that space. And in fact, after we left, no business has been successful in that business for more than a year or two. It still is always up for lease or up for rent. So,
well, we were paying $4,800 a month rent net lease, which means you pay everything else: the water, the sewer, the electric, all of the anything like the trash. You have to pay
any bill the landlord gets, you pay. And they also they have something in New York called net lease, and you pay a tax on the net lease. So if you're paying $20,000, you pay the city let's say 8%. If you're paying $20,000, you have to pay the city a rent. It's called rent tax.
Oh,
We paid 7.5% tax, which is pretty high for.
And the funny thing is, it's a sliding scale. The more rent you pay, not the less, the higher the commission goes to the city.
wow.
So they figure you're making more money, you can afford a higher percentage. Not just the fact that it goes up, but you can get a higher percentage too. They sock it to you.
They had a tax called frontage tax, which if you can see the business from the street, you pay a frontage tax.
Golly, they're getting you coming and going.
Yeah,
Well, for those that don't know, the Magic Townhouse was the East Coast version of the Magic Castle, a lot of people called it, with the 4 levels. You had the Magic Shop, the Magic Showroom, you had a restaurant, and then you guys lived on the top floor, right?
Yeah, we had an apartment on the top floor. And then because we a lot of the times we weren't open on in the evening. During the week, we ended up buying an acting school, which was called Actors TV Studio in New York City, and we would train. I wouldn't, but we would hire. We did something innovative. At that time, the only school of its type teaching actors to do TV commercials was called Wes Barron. That was the name of the business, and they would have a one-camera setup, and they would hire people to teach other actors to teach actors how to do commercials, and they had a pretty successful school. But when we opened up our school, we did a whole different thing. What we did, we hired actual working casting agents for major network shows and actual agents that booked those shows. So it gave a chance to the people at the school to get a job from them.
If they were good, they got jobs.
They got jobs.
Now, was that in the? I'm confused. Is that in the Magic House, the Magic Townhouse?
Same building.
Same building. Okay. All right. We got about 10 minutes, guys. Just giving you a heads up. There's so much. Your history is so much. You can't.
Yeah, well, and then we also had full color, which they had one black and white camera. We had full color with switching abilities, switching back and forth, which the different directors that we hired loved that. That's why they would work for us, because they could experiment with different techniques that they then would use for the major programs that we're doing on the networks.
3 cameras.
Wow.
3 cameras. So the actors had.
We ended up with 3 cameras. We started with 2. We ended up with 3.
So the director that was teaching could have sit there with the switcher, and the cameras would light up. You know, and the actors had to learn when your camera goes dead, you can look for the camera that's lit.
A little red light would open up on the camera, and you would see the red light, and you would know that's the live camera, because everything was live in those days. So
Wow,
that gives
that's
you
so cool.
A quick rundown of some of the things we've done. And now, of course, the Houdini Museum is very successful. We run every day in the summer. We run weekends the rest of the year, and now we're totally shut down.
And the Houdini Museum is located where?
It's located in Scranton, Pennsylvania, on Main Avenue, 1433 North Main Avenue in Scranton, PA, and
you can find us on Houdini.org.
right,
Yeah, that's their website. Really good website, Houdini.org.
Houdini.org.
Doesn't get any easier than that.
Houdiniopoly.com. We also have Houdiniopoly.com if you're interested in buying the Houdiniopoly game, although we're not sending them out now because we don't want to go to the post office.
But you can get them from the website.
No, because we don't want to go to the post office.
Oh, okay. Okay, I got you.
So
I got you.
When the pandemic's over, everything will open up again. Because what's it worth to do something and risk your life? For us, it's not worth it.
I understand that. These guys are the Houdini experts. I'm gonna have, like I said, I'm gonna have Dorothy on in a couple weeks. But they've done consulting for the Travel Channel, the New York Times, London Times, the Daily News, Magic Road Trip television show, and so much more. The Houdiniopoly, they got that crowdfunded with a Kickstarter, and it's amazing. I do not own one, and I want to get one, and I'm gonna talk to Natalie about that. My wife is right here beside me, guys, so
Yeah.
I'm getting one.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to play it. I'm going to display it. So
Well,
I'm
then
not
you
going to
gotta
open it up.
Then you gotta get two so we can play one.
I'm going to buy two because I have little babies and they're going to ruin it. They're going to rip up my Houdini money and I don't want that.
You got it.
But you worked as a consultant. I got so much that I got to wrap everything up. You worked as a consultant for New York Shakespeare Festival, Woody Allen's The Magic Light Bulb. Dick, you've done so much, man. And your magic, I know you've created magic on your own. You've invented your own magic tricks, but it's not for sale. It's not for the public. Because you say you do magic for the public, not for magicians.
Right. We've never made a living off of magicians doing lectures or selling tricks to magicians. We've always done our magic for the general public, and we don't want to learn a magic trick unless 100 people can see it at one time, because that's the kind of work we do.
Well, I know we're going to talk in depth more and more about the Houdini Museum and all that's involved with the Houdini's gravesite and all that when Dorothy's on in a couple weeks. But man,
we didn't touch on the gravesite at all.
yeah, well, you were fantastic. I mean, you had so much to talk about. It's so crazy. You've written several books. You guys used to do a Dorothy and Dick radio show where you interviewed celebrities and magicians. Can they still find that on YouTube?
It's at dorothyanddick.com.
Oh, wow. dorothyanddick.com.
And I think there was still some live links as well.
Well, I know I enjoyed this podcast. What about you, Natalie?
Yeah, this was really fun.
The only thing that went over my wife's head, she looked at me when you said Bobby Darin and Mac the Knife. She said, Mac the Knife? She was born in 84, Dick.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's why.
I'll show her the McDonald's commercial. You remember the Mac the Knife moon? The Mac the Knight? The Big Mac? I'll have to look that up for her.
It was actually a takeoff. The first one to do that version of Mac the Knife, believe it or not, was Louis Armstrong.
Okay.
And Bobby Darin pretty much redid. It of course was a play originally or whatever, but Louis Armstrong did a jazz version of it, which then Bobby Darin updated with a big band. But it was the same. Here you go.
Pearly white. You don't remember this?
This is a nice segment.
She's just shaking her head. She has no idea. That's not ringing any bells at all. She doesn't get it. Nope. Guys, check them out. Houdini.org. They're on Facebook, a Houdini Museum. You can find out their interviews with celebrities and other magicians at dorothyanddick.com, which this is the first I'm hearing of that one. I'm going to go check that out right now. And Dorothy will be on our podcast in 2 weeks. And she's a magician in her own right. Like I said, and kind of teased Dorothy a little bit a couple weeks ago when Natalie and I were by ourselves. Uh-huh. But the first and only female magician that I know of that did the bullet catch. So that's pretty awesome. And guys, seriously, thank you guys so much for doing this.
Not a problem. Love you.
That hour flies by, doesn't it?
If you think I had a lot to talk about, she's got even more.
Well, we might have to do a two-parter then. You guys are awesome. Hey, I'm going to do some plugs real quick and just stay on the line and we'll wrap everything up. You guys were fantastic. Thank you guys.
You got it.
Check them out at Houdini.org. Guys, the Houdini Museum up there, it's amazing. We're in Virginia. We never get a chance to get up there, but it's one of those places where I really want to go visit, and they do a really good job. They have their heart and soul into this place. So check it out, Houdini.org. They're on Facebook, the Houdini Museum. And on Saturday, March 6th, I'll be performing at the Lafayette Inn and Restaurant in Standardsville, Virginia from 6 to 8 p.m. I'll be going from table to table performing magic, as they will provide you with a 4-course meal, and combination will make it a truly magical evening. This event usually sells out, so don't wait. If you're traveling from out of town or out of state, ask them about staying the night in their inn, which has limited space, so reserve your spot today. Check them out at thelafayette.com. And one more thing, all 16 episodes of Wes Iseli's Magiclife Season 1 are now available on Jewel TV. Jewel TV is on Roku, it's on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Jewel TV app, and 100 million other places. You check it out, you can find it. And Season 2 debuts, we just found out, on February 26th. See you next week. Today's episode of the podcast is sponsored by Express Copy and Graphics. Mention promo code Wes Iseli to get 10% off. Their website is expresscopy.com. That's XPRESS-COPY.com. They do it all. Copies, banners, signs, vehicle wraps, promo items, practically anything you need printed, they can do it for you. These guys are great. Check them out. Check us out online at wesiseli.com and patreon.com/Wes_Iseli for behind-the-scenes videos, blooper videos, never-before-seen footage, discounts on merchandise, magic trick tutorials, and more. That's Wes Iseli, spelled WESISELI.